The question of bilingualism has often emerged in history as a result of the confluence of different cultures. The debate can be traced back to Spanish colonialism and the replacement of indigenous languages by Spanish. As seen in this article published only a few years ago, citizens of Miami, Florida continue to consider the effects of language on the well-being of their community. The bilingualism debate can be traced back many decades before, with its peak in the second half of the 20th century. In 1959, communist leader Fidel Castro took control of Cuba and through a series of radical political changes, propelled many Cubans, especially supporters of their last ruler, Fulgencio Batista, to emigrate to the United States in search of political security, financial security, or both. The steamline and cigar industry had, in previous years, solidified relationships between Cuba and the U.S., which spurred significant immigration that only increased during the 1959 Cuban Revolution. Cuban immigration was especially unique in comparison to the many other types of Latin American immigration, because Cuban immigrants were initially granted unique rights, most of which were highlighted in the 1966 Cuban Adjustment Act, which included easy access to things like Medicaid and food stamps. As a result of these special privileges, even more Cubans were tempted to immigrate. While many of these refugees were part of the island's elite, in later years there were more poor, unskilled, or criminal citizens also fleeing to the U.S. The two news articles displayed, published 7 years apart, demonstrate strong and quite unchanged perspectives on the bilingualism debate of Dade County. The first article demonstrates both sides of the debate in 1980, the year when English-only advocates were on the rise. This rise was in part due to Castro's recent release of Cubans onto the U.S. shore, which led to some 60,000 refugees from Cuba, some of whom were convicted felons, entering Miami. The campaign against bilingualism was now in full swing, spearheaded 2 years before by Emmy Schaefer, who ironically was herself an immigrant from Russia. The Anglo-Americans of Dade County preached some certainly racist arguments, as seen in Johnson's article. Anglo-Americans felt threatened by Latin American influence and hoped to assert their white power through having English as the only language in Miami. On the other side of the debate, immigrants to Miami, most of whom were Spanish-speaking, hoped that systemic bilingualism would not only help them transition into their new environment, but also simply better represent the demographics of their diverse city. This systemic bilingualism would include translations of signs, documents, and public notices into Spanish. The second article, published by the Orlando Sentinel in 1987, shows the backlash against the 1980 measure reversal and Dade County's consequent return to monolingualism after winning 3-2 in a referendum. The article primarily concerns Jorge Valdez's goal to revert to the 1973 bilingual measure. It is important to consider the complexity of this debate. Some people genuinely valued a monolingual system over a bilingual one in hopes of cultural centrality, although those who advocated this were in fact mostly native English speakers who were at a societal advantage. What is most important to acknowledge here is the clear inequality in voting rights. Even with 43.4% of Dade County's population of 1.8 million being Hispanic, this was greater than the Anglo-American population, a mere 37.3%, a referendum still would not accurately represent the views of the people due to a widespread lack of citizenship and other voting obstacles among the Hispanic immigrant population. The first Hispanic citizens from Dade County were elected to state legislature in 1982. Government representation, both Valdez and Johnson 7 years earlier argue, was key to any legislative reform in the direction of returning bilingualism to Dade County. Thus, it was only until 1993, with a newly elected county commission composed of a plurality of Cubans, that Dade County at last repealed the monolingual ordinance and established translations of English notices, documents, and other public services into Spanish. The bilingualism debate of the 20th century was one clear manifestation of the social and political exclusion that Latin American immigrants faced in the United States. Think about how this story resonates today. Have you experienced debate regarding languages within your own experience? Does this conflict manifest within your family, education system, hometown, or country?